Well, it's been quite a while since I have done one of these videos, but I want to begin again. I do have 29 subscribers and maybe others who listen in, and I am glad some people have been interested in my attempts to share my studies and my biblical knowledge. Today, as I used to say so often in my Spanish programs, I am doing this program primarily preaching to myself or because of a need that I have to study and share the Word of God, in this case, the Gospel of John, because of the many difficulties that we have today in this world, in this country, I myself in my personal life. And so, even though I usually read something, read some of my morning books, I read little pieces of books, and then I get to the fun book at the end and I spend more time on it. Today, I just did about an hour and a half of cleaning that I had to do this week, and I decided to rush into this program out of a real need to almost hear myself talk about the Word of God, and in this case, the Gospel of John, which I will shortly explain why I've chosen now to go into the Gospel of John and what my approach is going to be this time. As you may know, I have, I think, 60 some programs on Mark and some other programs, and in Spanish, many programs, short ones that I have stopped doing. But the Gospel of John, excuse me, is a very unique gospel, and I wanted to review it and nourish myself from what I will be reading and thinking about and talking about. This picture you see here reflects the state of my soul these days. This is a picture I found. I didn't take it. I, would like to give credit to whoever took it, but it's in Cuba, and it's the Pope blessing this man, this three Cuban men. I think the Pope looks like Pope John Paul II. I don't think it's Francis. It doesn't really matter who the Pope is. What strikes me about the picture is the look on these three older men's faces, very Cuban, and each of them expressing a different aspect of life in a way, or of approach to religion or to the Pope. The Pope came to Cuba. This is Pope John Paul II, I believe it is. This was 1997, and I missed the whole thing because I was living in Rome and I had no TV. So I missed all the television on the Pope in Cuba in 1997, and I found this picture. Now, the man that the Pope is touching has this very typical humble Cuban expression. He's trying to, I don't think he has both hands together, just one hand extended, and he's very earnest, has a very earnest look on his face, and is obviously, I think, hoping for a real blessing from the Pope. Then you have, I think it's a man, I doubt that it's a woman, to his right, who has a look of real anguish and maybe even some despair as he looks at this Pope visiting Cuba. The Pope famously said at the time, Cuba must open to the world and the world must open up to Cuba. And even back then, more than 20 years ago, Cuba was going through a rough time. Today, Cuba is going through an incredibly rough time with scarcity of every kind. People are fed up. There's governmental repression worse than in a long time. COVID, of course, makes everything worse everywhere. Get vaccinated. And then the last man towards the rear there has his hand up also. Apparently, people were doing that, or maybe spontaneously they did that. And he's got that look on his face of not skepticism, but many Cubans really are not, at least sentimentally, religious. And so he's definitely there hoping to, again, get a blessing. And I do see something that looks like some sort of a wheelchair. So who knows whether this man was helping the other man uh, be wheeled around. But I wanted to show this. I have this as my Facebook cover picture because it's so touching to me. So I wanted to speak about the Gospel of John, and it's a gospel, and even the Johannine corpus, as they say. You add the first, second, and third letters of John and the book of Revelation too. If I'm not mistaken, I taught all that in the Johannine corpus course, the body of John literature at the seminary. So if you go to my website, BibleExplainer.com, or you put Chavez in so that you can easily hit the right site, it'll say not secure because I haven't paid the extra money to be certified as secure, but trust me, it's secure. There are no viruses or anything else on this website. And if you go to various biblical writings for courses, you will see right after Intro to Bible, John. And it's very simple. You've got the commentary on John, which is only like 40 pages, because the course presupposed a very small book by Raymond Brown on the Gospel of John and the letters of John. So that I presupposed I required the little book, I think 100-page book or so. Raymond Brown has, 3-volume commentary, I think, on John. But this was for the seminarians, a small book, plus my own commentary. Then I have a separate writing that I did on the serpent, on the ensign. So this is the serpent that was put on something like a pole, suitable to have a banner or an ensign or a sign on it. Hebrew nace. So that famously in chapter 3 of John, Jesus says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. See, now I'm already getting a little bit emotional because I didn't prepare much for this at all, except maybe dreaming at night or something. And now that I hit on this word lifted up, which is very prominent in John, even though it's used only 3 times, I think. It's an incredibly important verb, which refers to the action of the servant in Isaiah 53, the 4th song of the suffering servant. And it also refers to what the scapegoat does on Yom Kippur in Leviticus 16. So that it's an incredibly sacrificial term, but we're not going to jump to that yet. I just wanted to show you what is in this section on the Gospel of John brief commentary on the Gospel of John, and it's 39 pages. And I begin discussing who the author of this gospel might be. I wrote this probably the year 2000 or 2001, so 20 years ago. And what I'm going to do here is not go by that, just like I really don't think I went at all. I didn't use my mark notes when I did my 60 or so episodes on the Gospel of Mark, even though those notes were later than 2001. But I am going to try to spontaneously share what my thoughts are as I again read with you all the Gospel of John. It's the easiest Greek, so that even though I'm rusty on my Greek, I can read it without, much problem at all. And then, of course, you have the Latin version, which is usually incredibly literal and accurate. And then with this program, Accordance, which would not have been my first choice, but BibleWorks went out of business. And when I changed computers, I also lost my BibleWorks app after 20 years or whatever, almost 20 years of using it. I went to what I thought was the best substitute. I don't think it's an incredibly great substitute, but it's better than nothing for sure. I mean, I don't want to poo-poo Accordance, but I'm so sorry, BibleWorks is out of order. And so I hope to nourish myself and you as I share, as a good Dominican, which I was, contemplare et contemplata alis tradere, to contemplate, which is a Johannine verb, the theorein, behold, sort of a fixed gaze, contemplative look. See and believe is very important in John. I was asked to do a book review, which I did. I could probably find it somewhere. In fact, I can look for it, on the verb. The book is actually called it's Come and See or something like that. And I think it was written in Italian. So I have a section in my website called Book Reviews, but it doesn't have that one. It has some other ones. So much for that. But in any case, seeing, we're going to see how important that is, which makes me think right away, of course, in Dominican fashion, the need to look at Christ. Elizabeth of the Trinity has a wonderful saying, look at the crucifix and listen. In fact, I was thinking about the word listen this morning as I was cleaning my kitchen. I was thinking about how people don't listen, and how in Hebrew, the verb to hear, like in Shema Yisrael, the verb to hear, Shmuel, Samuel, the Lord has heard, or God has heard, the verb to hear, when you add the lamed or el directive sort towards something, here towards something, it means to obey. And then I thought, but in Latin it's the same thing. Obedire, audire, means to hear, audire, audition, something. And so listening is kind of like a counterpart to seeing, and listening and obeying is sort of in parallel. This is something new. I didn't think about this before, because this is regarding the Gospel of John, parallel to see and believe. So when the beloved disciple beats Peter to the tomb in John 20, um, he sees and believes in verse 8 of John. But there are other instances that we're going to look at. I don't want to give a real long introduction. Just I'll summarize that I believe that the Gospel of John deliberately omits the name of the writer, like the Gospels tend to do. Kata Ioannein, or maybe Ioannein, is an ancient superscription or something written at the top of the manuscripts. The great Martin Hengel, if I'm not mistaken, the great Lutheran German Bible scholar whom Pope Benedict XVI consulted when Pope Benedict XVI's first volume on Jesus of Nazareth came out, and I think was criticized for using outdated exegesis that the Pope, Ratzinger had read probably in the 50s or 60s, maybe somewhat later, he kept up or something, but he decided to consult with Hengel, a Lutheran, German, to have a very solid, obviously, but very learned and very up to date at the time, of course, sort of a brushing up on the status or state of exegesis, biblical studies. And Hengel believes that yes, this is a very ancient title. It's according to John, yes, but the John is some John of Ephesus and not the beloved disciple. So that obviously the author that is identified in this gospel, in the second, in the additional ending to the gospel, the epilogue, as the Bible of Jerusalem, which I use in Spanish, says, it says, "This is the disciple who gives testimony of these things and who has written them, and we know that his witness or testimony is true." And it ends, famously with, there are many other things that Jesus did, and if they were written one by one, I think not even the whole world would be enough to contain the books that would be written. So I think that this author, who traditionally is identified with John, the brother of James, sons of Zebedee, sons of thunder, they're called in some Gospels. The Gospel of John in chapter 21 does talk about those to whom Jesus appears, including the ones of Zebedee, the sons of Zebedee, but it doesn't say sons, but we understand that it is. He's deliberately wanted to remain anonymous, or at the very least not claim that he is John, the son of Zebedee. Just like the author of the book of Revelation doesn't say, "I am John, the son of Zebedee." I am John, a prophet, not an apostle or some other title. So that this gospel was written by somebody who we could probably say is the beloved disciple, but who only begins to appear in chapter 13 at the Last Supper, reclining on Jesus' bosom as Jesus was in the bosom of the Father in the prologue of the Gospel, John 1:18. So there's a parallel between the intimacy of Jesus and the Father, whom no one has ever seen, but the only begotten God, he has revealed or told us the story about it. He has exegetized the story for us, explained or unfolded it or something. And so, and I said only begotten God, not by mistake, even though I do make old person mistakes all the time. and say things that are wrong that I'm not even aware of because my brain doesn't function like it did before. The best reading is this: monogenes theou, the only begotten Son of God, or the only begotten God. God no one has ever seen, but the monogenes theos, the only begotten God who was in the bosom of the Father, he has exegetized or explained it to us. And the only Bible that I'm aware of that translates correctly is the New Vulgate. In fact, we can look at it here. Um, you know, um, we can look at it here in the New Vulgate. Uh, Unigenitus Deus. No one has ever seen God, and the ESV is doing it correctly. The only God, he doesn't say only begotten God, but it translates the only God who is at the Father's side, so it avoids this bosom thing. He has made him known. So you see that there are some changes in the New Vulgate which I think improve on the old Vulgate, and some other changes that are the opposite. They don't improve on the old Vulgate. But I think this is one verse, and another one would be, if I'm not mistaken, Jesus delivers the Spirit. He doesn't hand over his Spirit or expire on the cross. In John, he hands down or hands over, hands on, transmits the Spirit. And it's almost like expiring, but it's really the Pentecost in the Gospel of John. And then, of course, he is going to breathe into the apostles that very first day of the week, Sunday, for us, when the same verb is used for God breathing into Adam's nostrils in Genesis 2, I think it is. And Jesus then blows into them in Genesis 2:7 and says, receive the Holy Spirit. So the delivery, transmission, tradere, the Latin where the word tradition comes from, which is the masora in Hebrew, paradosis in Greek, Jesus delivers the Spirit and the disciples receive it, which is the Hebrew Kabbalah, or the Latin receptio, or the Greek, I forget what it is in Greek, and I'm going to look it up right now then on my Bible, not so much on this program. Jesus says to them, labete neuma hagion, labein, so receive the Holy Spirit. So I think the author has deliberately left his identification simply as a model, the disciple whom Jesus loved, or the beloved disciple who reclined intimately with Jesus at the Last Supper, that Peter has to go through to ask, who are you talking about when you say someone's going to betray you, etc. He's the one that knows the high priest. Peter lags behind. He's the one that is at the foot of the cross when no other disciple is. He's the one to whom Jesus entrusts the mother, Mary, but Mary is not named in the gospel either. She is the mother or woman, the new Eve. And he's the first to believe. Lets Peter get to the tomb first, or enter first. He beats Peter running to the tomb, but lets Peter go in. Peter draws a blank when he sees the empty tomb and the cloths. I think Peter gets to see the cloths too, but he draws a blank. But the beloved disciple is the first to see and believe, as we said. So that definitely this gospel, I believe, was written in a vein of don't be so concerned about authority figures, apostles, who's the head apostle, etc. Even though Peter right away gets named, or Simon right away in this gospel gets named Petros, rock. You don't have to wait till Matthew 16 in this gospel. Peter is right away said to have been called by Jesus. You are Simon, the son of John. You will be called Kepa or Cephas, which means rock. So that those are hard historical details that this gospel is not going to, avoid. In fact, one of the other things I want to say by way of introduction to this gospel is that one of the reasons I've chosen it is that it's so lofty and spiritual or mystical, or Jesus as the Word speaking to us. But at the same time, and this is not why I chose it, but it's part of my position that I've had for many, many years. It zaps you with historical data missing in the synoptics, or at least allusions to historical data. For example, the arrest of Jesus in the Gospel of John includes, it says, a Roman cohort, which would be very unlikely that 600 soldiers, or at a minimum 400 soldiers, came to arrest Jesus. But the important thing in this gospel is that when Jesus says, I am, they fall to the ground. But the allusion or referencing of Romans in the arrest of Jesus is very interesting, because it means that it wasn't just a Jewish high priest kind of concern about Jesus, but at least in this gospel's presentation, the Romans were interested already from the time of the arrest, which in the other gospels, and this is one of the topics we're going to discuss, the Jews, or even the Pharisees or the high priests or whoever, are really the only ones that sort of, in Spanish we say, echan a Jesús para adelante. They push Jesus forward in the lineup, and they sort of, tell on him or snitch on him or cause him to be arrested or condemned by Pilate. But it's an intra-Jewish thing. Whereas in this gospel, the very messianic entry of Jesus is highly politically charged. Uh, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and the King of Israel, which, by the way, is an expression this gospel likes, the King of Israel, rather than the King of the Jews, even though the inscription or titulus, the title put around Jesus, is said to be Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews, which I think is the historical appellation or name for Jesus as King of the Jews. This gospel, beginning in chapter 1, Jesus is confessed as the King of Israel. And I think that probably has to do with Israel being a broader category than just Jew or member of the tribe of Judah, even though a Jew takes on a really religious or theological meaning beyond a geographical tribal designation. He's a Jew, or he's from Naphtali or Gad or Asher or whatever tribe it is, Benjaminite or something. Israel refers to the 12 tribes, and this gospel is going to have Jesus talk to the Samaritan woman. And I think there's something broader going on there, by apropos or on purpose. And so I think the author originally was way out there, um, as far as the 12 are not very well put in a very nice light in this gospel. Thomas is one of the 12, and Jesus in the Eucharistic discourse on John 6, in John 6 says, "I have chosen, then I choose you 12," and he says, "And one of you is a devil," so that these authority titles in this gospel seem to have been originally, and maybe even just in general, not grate, or not pleasing to the author. But I do think that, and most scholars I think agree, even though I haven't read on John for years, but most scholars would agree that the epilogue, the chapter 21 edition, after the first conclusion, as the Jerusalem Bible says, this epilogue is meant to rehabilitate Peter, who had three times denied being a disciple. Raymond Brown points that out. What Peter really denies that's really bad is not just that he doesn't know Jesus, but that he's not a disciple. And so the rehabilitation of Peter in chapter 21 is enormous. He loves, using Johannine criteria, he loves Jesus more than the others, even though Jesus, beginning with the agape love verb, asks Peter twice, and Peter is reluctant to answer, or actually answers by saying, I love you, with a lesser verb. I think in Italian they're doing it the best way possible. Amare and volere bene. It's like really like you a lot, if you kind of wanted to say that, even though they both mean love, but different nuances, or the verbs are different. So after the first two times that Jesus says, "Do you love me?" and Peter says, "I really like you," more or less. The third time Jesus goes down to Peter's level and says, "Do you really like me more than these?" He goes, "Everything, Lord," etc. But nevertheless, even though Jesus has to adapt himself to Peter's lesser level that might be expected or desired of love, nevertheless, he's rehabilitated by a three times declaration that he, in fact, does love Jesus more than the others. And then Jesus gives him this commission of feeding my sheep. I think he alternates also between uh, sheep and lambs. He has shepherd my sheep, and before it says shepherd my lambs. So according to the Jerusalem Bible, I would have to double check it. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in this gospel with a minimal vocabulary, if you will. In Greek, the vocabulary is limited, and things are super repeated all the time. But nevertheless, incredibly high theology is expounded and represented in this gospel, so that it's a really interesting gospel. And passion things, such as Jesus carrying the cross without help, or Jesus in the garden. It's called the garden, not Gethsemane, the oil press. This garden is like Adam's garden. In that garden, Adam and Eve were deceived, they failed. In this new garden, as the Mel Gibson movie shows, The Passion of the Christ, the head of the serpent is crushed by Jesus. I don't know if I like that movie a lot, but it's a brilliant stroke in that scene, for sure. And so you have Jesus carrying his own cross, not agonizing in Gethsemane, but with echoes, always echoes, that my soul is troubled. And am I going to say, Father, free me from this hour? But in fact, I have come for this hour, etc. So that this is like a glorified Jesus that is still has the signs of having come in the flesh. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. That's why I love this Johannine Christ, as the Dominican friar, may he rest in peace, Gabriel Chico, when he gave it to me, he said, this is a Johannine version of Christ, majestic, dressed like a high priest, I think, but on the cross. It's a very nice cross, but a cross nonetheless. So that this is a super interesting gospel, and I do want to keep these sessions under 45 minutes, and I'm not feeling incredibly well these days sometimes anyway, and I'm excited about this opportunity, so that the gospel, I think, has been said to have had this addition made at the end, after the first conclusion, some, maybe a couple of decades later, maybe by the same author. All these things are possibilities. I don't get too much into that. But I think to understand the gospel, you need to understand that it's presenting the beloved disciple as a model rather than some authority person by being one of the 12. Uh, Even Peter doesn't come out so well, except when he's rehabilitated. And then you could almost interpret and translate even that when Peter has turned, the very end of the gospel almost, which reminds you of Jesus telling Peter in Luke. I think there are echoes of other gospels in this fourth gospel, or Gospel of John. When you have been turned, you shall confirm your brethren, in Luke 22:32. Well, here, I think the literal Greek is Peter, having been turned, sees the disciple whom Jesus loved following. So in this rendering, or this description, uh, he sees the disciple whom Jesus loved following. You might even say following Jesus and Peter. By the way, Peter will die the same death as Jesus. He will glorify God with the same death. Now that's incredible rehabilitation. I mean, that really elevates Peter way, way up there. Um, and so you have that other parallel. Jesus in chapter 12 talks about being lifted up, and the evangelist says he said this to indicate what manner of death he was going to suffer, or from what kind of death he was going to die in 12:33, so that more symbolic language is explained literally. Well, here at the end of the gospel, it says, and truly, truly, I tell you, when you were young, you girded yourself and you went where you wilt. But when you become old, you will extend your hands, and another one will tie you up or gird you and take you where you do not want to go. With this, he indicated the kind of death with which he was going to glorify God. Having said this, he added, "Follow me." So Peter follows Jesus. And then Peter having been turned or having turned, it would make more sense, but I think you could look at it literally too. Cease following the beloved disciple. And you could say that Peter starts following Jesus and the beloved disciple follows Peter. So you have that kind of situation there. And so this is kind of an introduction to what we hope to do with, you know, regularity, not go line by line, but at least read for myself afresh what the gospel is saying, and that way try to recall and explain and use new things that I have learned and experienced as we discuss this Gospel of John. And I think that should be enough for today. And I hope to next time, hopefully tomorrow maybe, just begin reading this, certainly with an eye on the Greek and the Latin, because even though this translation surprises often the ESV, the English Standard Version, surprises with good, literal, accurate translations. It also surprises with what I don't think are good, literal, accurate translations. So we'll have to look at what the Greek says, and not that the Greek is always super clear, or that I will be an expert on it, or on the Latin, or that the Latin will be perfect. But nevertheless, with the three of them and my Spanish and my notes, etc., we should be okay at the level of the accuracy of the text we are reading and discussing. And with that, I will stop at 42 minutes or so. And, may God grant us further occasions like this.